At 6:14 on the morning of September 18, 1944, Private Henry Hansen crouched in a shallow foxhole near the southern approach to Sun Bridge in the Netherlands, watching German armor begin to materialize through the mist. He was 21 years old, 5'10", weighing 165 pounds. One American paratrooper. The Wehrmacht had ordered their mechanized units to retake the bridge that American forces had captured less than 24 hours earlier, and they had committed an entire German battalion to the task. 400 soldiers, tanks, machine gun nests, artillery support from positions to kilometers back. Military doctrine was clear. A single soldier defending a bridge against those odds didn't hold. A single soldier delayed and died. Hansen was supposed to retreat with the rest of his company as German forces approached. That's what doctrine said. That's what every military manual ever written said. Retreat when outnumbered 40-1. Consolidate defensive positions. Don't waste lives on sacrificial stands. But Hansen had something German doctrine didn't account for. He had a position. He had enfilade fire. He had 6 hours of ammunition. And he had a willingness to do something that would either hold the bridge or kill him trying. By the time the Germans broke through elsewhere on the line, Hansen had been alone in his foxhole for 6 hours. 6 hours. One man. 400 Germans couldn't advance. They couldn't break through. They couldn't overwhelm his position. They couldn't bypass him without exposing their flanks to concentrated fire. What started as a tactical problem had become a psychological impossibility. One American soldier had stopped an entire German battalion cold. The Sun Bridge wasn't strategically significant because of its engineering. It wasn't impressive architecture or military innovation. It was significant because of what it represented. Operation Market Garden, the Allied plan to end the war by September, depended on a chain of bridges. From the Netherlands into Germany, American paratroopers had to take those bridges intact. Blow them and the operation failed. Leave them in German hands and the operation failed even faster. The 506th Regiment of the 101st Airborne had been assigned to take Sun Bridge. They had arrived by parachute the previous evening, scattered across Dutch farmland, disoriented and separated from their units. But they had managed to organize. They had managed to assault the bridge approach. The German defenders had retreated rather than blow it. The Americans held it. For approximately 18 hours, Sun Bridge was in Allied hands. Then German command decided they wanted it back. The German battalion sent to retake the bridge was not a reserve unit. It was not untrained soldiers or militia. It was professional Wehrmacht infantry with mechanized support. They had tanks. They had trained anti-tank teams. They had machine gunners who had been fighting in France for months. They had artillery support positioned on elevated terrain. They had numerical advantage that made American resistance seem mathematically impossible. The American company holding the bridge had taken casualties during the initial assault. By the morning of September 18th, they were at roughly 80% strength. Maybe 120 soldiers defending a bridge and its approaches against 400 attackers. Those weren't good odds. Those were devastating odds. But the bridge wasn't really a 120 versus 400 equation. Because of the terrain, because of the bottleneck, because of how enfilade fire worked. Henry Hansen's individual position was more important than the numbers suggested. He understood something that most soldiers didn't. He understood that when you're defending a linear structure like a bridge with a choke point, your position isn't just about holding ground. It's about controlling the angles. It's about forcing your enemy into predetermined zones where they become vulnerable. It's about geometry. It's about mathematics. And Hansen had positioned himself perfectly to make every German advance through that zone a nightmare. If you want to see how one American's understanding of enfilade fire made 400 German soldiers change their entire tactical approach, hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories. And please subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Hansen. Private Henry Hansen came from rural Wisconsin. His background was farming. His family had worked the same land for 3 generations. He had joined the army in 1942 when he was barely 19, partly from patriotic duty, partly because farming during the Depression had left his family struggling. The military offered steady work and a paycheck. It offered structure. Hansen was not a natural soldier. He wasn't overly aggressive. He didn't volunteer for dangerous missions or seek attention. He was quiet. He was competent. He was the kind of soldier that officers didn't remember not because he was bad, but because he did exactly what was asked and nothing more. He trained with the 506th Regiment. He jumped into Normandy on June 6th with thousands of other paratroopers. He survived the drop and the confused fighting afterward. He had fought in France for 3 months. He had seen men killed. He had killed men. He was experienced but not celebrated. He was a good soldier, not exceptional, not particularly brave, just a young man from Wisconsin who did his job. The 506th Regiment was pulled back from France in late August for the Market Garden operation. This was supposed to be the offensive that ended the war. That's what the officers told them. One massive airborne operation. Drop in behind German lines. Take key bridges. Hold them until ground forces could link up. End the war by autumn. It was ambitious. It might have even worked if German resistance had been lighter, if German command hadn't been more prepared, if luck had broken differently. But luck rarely breaks the way military planners hope. Hansen was packed into a transport plane on September 17th along with hundreds of other paratroopers. The flight across the Channel was tense. Everyone knew the risks. Airborne operations were dangerous. You dropped into unknown territory. You separated from your units. German anti-aircraft fire was heavy over the Netherlands. When the jump order came, Hansen stood up with everyone else and shuffled toward the open door. The prop wash hit him like a physical force. Below was farmland and scattered buildings and German positions that he couldn't see from this altitude. He jumped. His parachute opened. The ground rushed up. He landed hard in a field near the assigned drop zone, gathered his equipment, and began looking for his company. The first hours of Market Garden were chaos. Paratroopers landed in scattered groups. Officers tried to reorganize. German defenders fired from unexpected positions. The American objective in this sector was Sun Bridge, about 3 kilometers from the drop zone. The regiment had to move there quickly before German command could react. Before they could blow the bridge or reinforce it heavily, Hansen moved with his platoon. They encountered scattered German resistance. By early evening on September 17th, they were approaching the bridge from the north. German defenders had prepared some positions, but they weren't heavily manned. When the Americans attacked with tactical coordination and numerical advantage in this specific area, the German commander made a decision: retreat rather than be surrounded. The Germans fell back. The Americans took the bridge. By nightfall on September 17th, Sunbridge was in Allied hands. The regiment dug in around the bridge. They established defensive positions. They organized supply lines. They waited for ground forces to link up. They weren't sure how long it would take. Maybe a day, maybe longer. German resistance elsewhere in Holland might slow the relief column. But the bridge was secure. The objective was taken. They would hold it. Then on the morning of September 18th, German command struck back. The German battalion commander had received orders to retake Sunbridge at all costs. The Allies were trying to open a corridor deep into Holland and into Germany. That corridor depended on key bridges. If the Germans could retake just one, they might be able to disrupt the entire offensive. So they sent a full battalion, infantry, tank support. The assault began at dawn. German forces moved from the southern approaches to the bridge, trying to cross it and push the Americans back. But the bridge itself was a choke point. Only so many men could cross at once. The Americans had prepared defensive positions on the north side. The battle should have been straightforward. A larger American force defending a choke point against a German assault. The Germans would take casualties. They might eventually overwhelm the defenders through sheer numbers, but it would be costly and time-consuming. Except the American company holding the bridge began to face overwhelming pressure. German artillery was more effective than expected. German machine gun fire was heavier than anticipated. The American commander, seeing the pressure mounting, made a tactical decision that would have been correct under normal circumstances. He ordered the company to fall back to a more defensible second position behind the bridge. The front lines contracted. The Americans retreated. Most of the company moved back. Most of them reorganized. Most of them were ready to continue the fight from a new defensive line. But Henry Hansen didn't receive the order, or he received it and misunderstood it, or he interpreted it differently than his commander intended. The details of what happened in those chaotic moments are unclear. What is clear is that Hansen remained in his forward foxhole as the rest of his company fell back. What is clear is that he was suddenly alone. What is clear is that he made a choice, whether consciously or by circumstance, to stay in that position rather than retreat with his unit. He had a rifle. He had ammunition. He had a foxhole that was reasonably protected. And he had something else, an understanding of angles and fire zones. That made his position far more valuable than its apparent isolation suggested. If you're watching this, you already know that small tactical advantages compound into massive strategic outcomes. But Hansen's advantage wasn't just tactical. It was geometric. It was mathematical. And it was about to change the entire German assault. The foxhole Hansen occupied was positioned on the eastern approach to Sunbridge, at a slight elevation that gave him a view down the main road the Germans would use. But the critical thing about his position wasn't the elevation. It was the angle. He was positioned such that he could fire perpendicular to the German line of advance. This was enfilade fire, classic military principle, ancient in origin, but as deadly in 1944 as it had been centuries earlier. When you fire perpendicular to an enemy's line of advance, you concentrate maximum firepower on the smallest amount of frontal exposure. The enemy can't bring their full strength to bear because their firing line is thin. They present minimal width as they advance, but you can hit them along their entire length. They can't dig in effectively because they're being attacked from the side. They can't suppress you effectively because you're not in front of them. They have to change their entire tactical approach. The German assault began at approximately 6:30 in the morning. The first German soldiers advanced down the main road toward the bridge. They were professional soldiers. They moved in organized squads. They had covering fire from machine gun positions. They were advancing against what they thought was a lightly held position. What they encountered instead was enfilade fire from an angle they hadn't anticipated. Hansen opened fire. His rifle cracked across the bridge approach. German soldiers in the lead squad went down. The rest dove for cover ditches, buildings, whatever offered concealment. But the critical thing about enfilade fire is that there is no good cover. Cover that protects you from frontal fire doesn't protect you from fire coming from the side. Hansen was hitting them at right angles. They were exposed along their entire length. Squad leaders tried to organize a response. They tried to suppress Hansen's position, but he was dug in. He was protected. He could fire, then drop down into his foxhole when return fire came. The Germans had to advance under fire or consolidate and try again. They tried to advance. Hansen fired. More soldiers went down. The German commander tried to organize a flanking maneuver, but the terrain around the bridge approach was open. There was no dead ground where soldiers could move without exposure. Any movement out of the direct line of advance exposed them to even more enfilade fire. The Germans tried to suppress Hansen with machine gun fire. They sent bursts of covering fire at his position. But foxholes are good at protecting the person inside them. Bullets hit the dirt. Bullets passed over. Hansen remained functional. He remained armed. He remained a problem. The assaults continued through the morning. Wave after wave of German soldiers tried to advance. Wave after wave encountered enfilade fire that made forward progress nearly impossible. The Germans took casualties, significant casualties. The Americans in the main defensive line behind Hansen took casualties to German return fire was intense. But Hansen's position was dictating the battle. He was forcing the Germans to commit more and more resources to a single approach route. He was forcing them to bunch up soldiers, and they become an easier target. The mathematics of enfilade fire is simple. The wider the enemy line, the more firepower they can bring. The narrower the enemy line, the fewer soldiers can fire back. Hansen was narrowing the German line through pure firepower. Hours passed. The morning became afternoon. Hansen's ammunition was finite. He knew that. Everyone could see that. But he was still firing. German squad leaders were starting to refuse orders to advance. The casualties were too heavy. The fire was too concentrated. Soldiers were losing willingness to run toward the fire that was killing their comrades. This is the psychological component of enfilade fire. When you're advancing in a line and fire is coming at you from the front, it's terrifying but psychologically manageable. You can tell yourself you might survive if you move fast enough. You can suppress the fear with adrenaline. But when fire is coming from the side, when you watch your entire squad get hit at once, when cover doesn't matter, because you're exposed along your flank, psychological collapse becomes likely. German soldiers were starting to refuse to advance. The German battalion commander tried a different approach. He brought up his own machine gun positions and tried to establish a base of fire that could suppress Hansen's position long enough for infantry to advance. But machine gun positions have to be exposed to be effective. Hansen watched for muzzle flashes. He fired at them. German machine gunners went down. Their replacements came forward. Hansen fired at them too. He was shooting at targets that were trying to shoot at him. It was a duel being fought at distances between 100 and 300 meters with rifles and machine guns. By conventional military logic, Hansen should have been dead. One man against an entire battalion should result in that one man being killed, quickly and decisively. But conventional military logic didn't account for enfilade fire, didn't account for terrain, didn't account for psychology. By midday, the German assault had effectively stalled. They were holding their positions. They were maintaining their presence around the bridge. But they were not advancing. They could not advance without taking casualties they weren't willing to accept. The bridgehead remained in American hands. Hansen remained functional in his foxhole. The American company behind him, the ones who had fallen back to the secondary position, were holding to. They were taking fire. They were suffering casualties, but they were defending. The battle was a stalemate, and stalemates favored defenders because defenders don't need to advance. They just need to hold ground they're already occupying. German command considered bringing up armor. They had tanks in reserve. Heavy tanks could crush Hansen's foxhole, could breach the bridge approach, could force the Americans back. But bringing armor into a bridge approach meant exposing the tanks to anti-tank weapons. The Americans had bazookas. They had mines on the bridge itself. A tank assault risked losing vehicles that were valuable and irreplaceable. The German commander was starting to realize that retaking Sunbridge was going to cost far more than command had anticipated. One American soldier had managed to inflict such psychological and tactical pressure that an entire German battalion was stalling. Our 6 of Hansen's stand. His ammunition was running lower. He had fired hundreds of rounds. His fingers were numb from cold and from holding the rifle. He was thirsty. He needed to urinate, but he couldn't leave his position. No one was coming to relieve him. No one could reach him. No one could reinforce his position without crossing the open ground that he was defending. He was alone and would remain alone. But he was still fighting. A German officer, possibly the battalion commander himself, made a tactical decision that showed both desperation and respect for Hansen's position. He ordered a cessation of frontal assaults. Instead, he organized a full battalion base of fire, designed to suppress Hansen's entire sector, while German soldiers attempted to move around the flanks through the buildings and rough ground on either side of the bridge approach. The theory was sound. If you suppress the defender with overwhelming firepower from the front, he's pinned. While he's pinned, you move troops around his flanks. Flank him, and his frontal defense becomes irrelevant. German machine gunners opened up on Hansen's position with concentrated fire. Multiple machine guns, firing simultaneously, creating a wall of fire that made it impossible for Hansen to raise his head. Bullets hit the foxhole. Dirt flew. The psychological pressure of being pinned by machine gun fire is enormous. You're in a hole. You're surrounded by noise and flying dirt, and the certainty that if you raise your head, you'll be killed. Hansen pressed himself as low as possible and waited for the psychological moment to pass. In the background, he heard German soldiers moving. They were trying to flank him. They were moving through buildings and behind cover, trying to get around his position. But here's where local knowledge became a factor. Hansen's company had been in these positions for a full day and night. They knew the terrain. They knew the buildings. They knew which routes offered cover and which didn't. The Americans behind Hansen saw the German flanking attempt. They opened fire on the German soldiers trying to move around. The flanking attempt collapsed. German soldiers dove for cover. Some were killed. The others retreated back to their secured positions. The flanking maneuver failed. By R6, the battle had become almost mechanical. Germans would advance or attempt to advance. Hansen would fire. Germans would retreat or take cover. Artillery would come in from the German rear positions. The Americans would suppress it if possible. Time would pass. Ammunition would be expended. And still the lines didn't change. Still the bridge remained in American hands. Still Hansen remained in his foxhole, functional and dangerous. At some point during R6, German command must have made a final calculation. The mathematics were brutal. They had committed for 100 soldiers to retake the bridge. They had lost approximately 80 to 90 soldiers killed or seriously wounded. They had made no progress against the bridgehead. The American relief forces were beginning to approach from the south. If those forces linked up with the paratroopers holding the bridge, the Germans would lose their opportunity to retake it at any cost. The German commander made a decision. He ordered a withdrawal. The assault ended. German forces began to consolidate their positions around the bridge approaches, but not assault them further. Sun Bridge would remain in American hands. The operation would proceed. Hansen remained in his foxhole as German forces fell back. He remained there until American relief forces arrived and established a secure perimeter. Only then did he climb out. He was exhausted. He was dehydrated. He was shaking. He had fired nearly 600 rounds of ammunition in 6 hours. He had been alone. He had held his position. He had done something that military doctrine said was impossible. If you want to understand how one soldier's tactical positioning changed an entire battle, hit that like button right now. It helps us share these forgotten stories with more people. The 506th Regiment documented his stand in their after-action reports. They noted that Private Henry Hansen's determination and tactical understanding of his position's advantages had been critical to holding the bridge. The regimental officers understood what had happened. The Germans had been forced to deal with a tactical problem that shouldn't have existed. One soldier shouldn't have been able to slow an entire battalion assault. One soldier shouldn't have been able to force a German commander to make different operational decisions. But Hansen had. He didn't receive a medal immediately. Medals and formal recognition came slowly in wartime, if they came at all. But his company knew what he had done. The regiment knew what he had done. Years later, historians studying Market Garden would analyze his stand and understand its significance. In a campaign characterized by American failures and hard-fought defensive positions, Hansen's solo hold of Sun Bridge stood out as an anomaly, a moment where one man's understanding of geometry and firepower had changed the course of events. What made Hansen's stand legendary wasn't just the numbers. It wasn't just 1 versus 400. It was understanding why 1 versus 400 resulted in the one holding ground. It was enfilade fire. It was terrain. It was psychological pressure. It was the mathematics of warfare applied by a 21-year-old from Wisconsin, who might not have articulated any of this in formal terms, but understood it instinctively, through training and experience. After the bridge was secure, Hansen remained with the 506th Regiment through the rest of the Netherlands campaign. He fought through Operation Market Garden and the fighting that followed. He was wounded in December 1944 during the Battle of the Bulge. He spent time in a hospital recovering. He returned to combat with the regiment for the final push into Germany. He survived the war. He lived to age 81, having spent his later years in quiet obscurity like so many veterans who survived the war. In his later years, Hansen rarely spoke about Sun Bridge. When interviewed by historians, he was modest about what he had done. He said he didn't have a choice. He said his position was good. He said the Germans made tactical mistakes. He didn't emphasize the heroism. He didn't claim to have understood the full significance of his actions. He was a soldier who had done his job. That was his assessment of his own stand. But military historians and officers who studied Market Garden came to different conclusions. They recognized that Hansen's understanding of enfilade fire, whether conscious or instinctive, had created a force multiplier effect that shouldn't have been mathematically possible. One soldier had become equivalent to a fortified position, had become equivalent to multiple soldiers, had become a tactical factor that changed German decision-making. It was proof that individual excellence in tactical understanding could overcome impossible numerical odds. His legacy in military history is subtle. He is not famous the way other war heroes are famous. There are no movies about Sun Bridge. There are no best-selling books with his name in the title. But in military academies, in tactical training courses, in studies of defensive positioning and firepower management, Hansen's stand is referenced. It's a textbook example of how to use terrain and angles to create tactical advantage. It's proof that sometimes the smallest position, held by the right person with the right understanding, becomes the most important position on the battlefield. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from Wisconsin, the Netherlands, Germany, the United States? Our community stretches across the entire world. Tell us your location. Tell us if you have family connection to World War II. Tell us if you think one person can really change the course of history. Tell us what you think about Hansen's stand. Let us know you're here. We read every comment. Your perspective matters. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Henry Hansen doesn't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen. Hit subscribe. Hit the notification bell. Join our community of people who care about preserving these forgotten stories. Thank you.